The Alberta energy industry was eagerly waiting for the Keystone XL Pipeline to get finished since getting approval from U.S. President Trump. But newly elected President Joe Biden just put a stop to all of that. Today's guest is David Yager, an energy policy analyst and author of a new book, From Miracle to Menace, Alberta, a Carbon Story. He joins me via Skype from Calgary this morning. David, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully I can help.
Absolutely. So, David, let's get right into it. U.S. President Joe Biden made a statement on day one of his presidency by nixing the permit for the Keystone XL Pipeline. So we knew Biden would be doing things differently, but did this surprise you at all?
He said he was going to campaign on it. You have to understand, we're not talking about a pipeline. We're not actually talking about oil. We're talking about a symbol, what's become since the tar sands campaign began 12 years ago. It's actually a symbol of environmental success or environmental failure, if you will. So among the Green supporters that have seen with a two-party system in the States, pretty well everybody that doesn't think oil is a good idea is congregated in the Democratic Party. So the absolute ultra left of the political spectrum and the environmental movement is by default within the Democratic Party. And so for quite a number of years, this pipeline, a fairly short pipeline, when you realize there are 3.2 million kilometers of pipelines all over the world. Like, how did this pipeline and this oil become the problem? But it has become a symbol for something other than that. And so Biden said during the campaign that if he was elected, he would cancel it. The fact that he chose to do it as one of his first orders of business on day one.
And to what degree will this impact the Alberta and the Canadian energy industry?
Well, to have a piece of pipe that we don't have canceled, it won't affect day-to-day continuing operations. That was fully booked by the shippers. The shippers, the best market for this heavier oil that we produce in Alberta is the Gulf of Mexico. This was the most cost-effective way of getting that oil to the Gulf of Mexico. This would have resulted in the highest net backs we're likely to get for the product, probably would have shrunk the differential between world prices and Canadian prices. So economically, it would have been quite useful. But in terms of waking up the next day, it had no difference. But it was attractive. It was fully committed by the shippers. It would have been great for the future of the province. But 2 days later, here we are. It won't be as good as it would have been otherwise, but we're not going out of the business.
I know there's a lot of people upset about it. Do we have any options? I know Alberta Premier Kenney is talking about possible litigation, but does that have any chance of success?
Suing the White House or the United States of America hasn't exactly brought them to their knees in the past. The number of times it's been tried, it's symbolic, and you would think there would be a good case. It was a duly approved permit by the last president, and they buried the pipe and they spent the money. So there's no question there is a legal case, but the damages that may or may not be awarded after the lawyers' fees are done will just be a fraction of the opportunity cost of not having the pipe at all. We do have options. Of course, we've always had options. But our problems have also been in Canada, remember. We tried to build the Energy East pipeline to move this oil to all the way to New Brunswick. And of course, at that time, we were told, we don't need that. We've got Keystone. And we tried to build a terminal in Kitimat. We tried to build the Northern Gateway pipeline and export the oil to Tidewater and Pacific. And of course, that was shut down by the Prime Minister. So I think what possibly makes the Keystone decision even worse is the Keystone was for these two pipelines that have been either canceled or delayed because of political obstruction within Canada. Keystone was going to be the pop valve, and so I think we can maybe we can restart the internal discussions about is it possible to build pipelines to anywhere in Canada under the current government and the current political system.
Yeah, well, that's just it, right? So in addition to Canada being impacted, this will also impact a lot of people in the U.S. as well.
Look, when you're doing God's work on climate change and the environment, little things like the peons that would have worked in building the pipeline, or the fact that they'll still require heavy oil from Venezuela or Mexico or some other source that'll come in by tanker. These are secondary to the greater goal. No, it makes no sense economically. It makes no sense in terms of climate. It makes no sense anywhere except the politics of climate change. And again, that's why I said, what have we really lost? Well, it was a symbol. It's not just a pipeline. It's not just about oil. It is a political symbol to the people that backed the Biden presidency and gave them what they wanted, and we'll figure out their details later. That's a horrid start to Canada-U.S. relations, in my view.
Yeah, it really is. Now, speaking south of the border, is it possible that any of the U.S. companies that are affected or the state governors could have some sort of influence on convincing Joe Biden otherwise?
Who knows? I mean, if there was a major global supply disruption, I mean, oil is a pretty bizarre commodity with forces from all over the planet. If there was an outbreak of war in the Middle East and security supply became an issue, I mean, there are factors that could cause this to be revisited, but none that I know of at this particular moment.
Well, some do say that this is a great opportunity for the Prime Minister to push back and play a bit of hardball by cutting back oil exports to the U.S. So what would the pros and cons of that be?
It's not going to happen. I mean, there are trade tools. The old saying about Canada and the U.S. is our relationship is like sleeping with next door to an elephant, right beside an elephant. If the elephant is just sleeping there, you're warm and cozy. If it rolls over, you'll either freeze to death or get your death or get crushed. And so the policy tools that Canada has, uh, besides the historic relationship and the importance of the relationship, are pretty limited what we can do in terms of punishing them. So when I can see the Prime Minister looking at all the factors, including hydro exports out of Quebec, and looking at the whole thing and simply saying, well, he claims to have tried, and c'est la vie.
Right. So, like you're saying, our federal government doesn't really have a great track record of going to bat for Alberta's energy industry. Any
Not
guesses?
this one. I would say that.
Yeah.
That's not this current federal government.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing. If you look at the history on the Canadian pipelines, that were either buried. I mean, Energy East, they didn't actually cancel berries. They just made it very difficult to build it, with continued changes to the application process. And of course, Northern Gateway, just in case they thought of dusting that baby off, they brought in the tanker ban. That even if you built the pipeline, they wouldn't be allowed to have tankers anyway. So there's a coffin they really nailed shut on that pipeline. And so, yeah, the messaging from Ottawa on pipelines leaving Alberta has hardly been supportive. They've preferred to make it a U.S. issue, and now the U.S. has done what it did. And we have a couple of other pipelines involved. One is the Enbridge Line 3 expansion. The environmentalists in the States are already saying, well, what about this one? And then, of course, there's the issue with Enbridge Line 5, where the governor of Michigan has said, well, we'd like that one shut down as well. So in the great scheme of things, it may be that the path of least resistance is to make sure we can maintain what we have. Who knows where this is going to end? That's why it's such a complex issue and such a bad start to Canada-U.S. relationships. I mean, if you go back to Enbridge Line 5, the original pipeline went from Alberta to the Lakehead, Superior, Wisconsin, and then it went by tanker to Sarnia. And so there was really the cheapest way to get Alberta oil to Ontario was through the United States. When they put the pipeline in, the shortest distance, instead of going way up around the top of Lake Superior, was to go through the States. And so that was the sort of relationship we used to have with the United States, was the transborder transportation, cross-border transportation of oil and gas. I mean, in the past, if you go back to the original free trade agreement, we had a proportionality clause assuring the United States we'd never cut them off. There was another treaty passed in 1977, a cross-border treaty ensuring the free flow of oil and natural gas between the countries and cooperation. So exactly how many babies got tossed out with the bathwater on Wednesday remains to be seen. So there's some other issues here that hopefully won't make this regrettable situation worse.
Yeah, well, you'd mentioned that unusual situation with Line 5, and then you also mentioned the Line 3, which crosses the border in Illinois and then goes to the Gulf Coast. So is any of that going to work for Canada, or is Biden just going to shut it all down too?
They're both existing pipelines.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that conversation is being had. It was interesting that when they talked about Enbridge Line 5, all of a sudden Southern Ontario, and that, of course, that's how Quebec gets its oil
Right.
for the Montreal refineries and their propane. So it was sort of interesting. Well, we don't really hate all the pipelines. The ones that we need. So it's sort of interesting in a perverse way. It loops central Canada into the pipeline issue and hope again it just common sense indicates Keystone. I put Keystone in a separate category. Enbridge Line 3 already exists. This is simply a replacement pipeline. It's been in courts in the States. I'm not saying necessarily this will happen. That's why when you first asked the question, I looked at Keystone XL as something other than just a pipeline. If it were just a pipeline, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It is a symbol of environmental stewardship in many ways, which is regrettable, but it was a long-standing campaign. A lot of blood was spilled. A lot of work was done to brand it as just more than just a piece of pipe. Hopefully, the other pipelines will be regarded as just pipelines, and we can just soldier on and keep going with what we have.
David, I want to get your take on this one. So Joe Biden has said that the Keystone XL is tar sands that we don't need, right? He's been quoted as saying that, and that it just creates more pollution. But realistically, aren't pipelines a far safer option than transporting oil by truck or by tanker?
Of course, or rail. Yeah, the alternative when the Keystone was canceled the first time, we invented crude by rail. And that got up to 400,000 barrels a day at one point, depending on market conditions. But again, that's not about you're actually talking common sense. You're talking safety and transportation and the need for oil. And that's why I specifically describe this pipeline and its contents as something. It's not just oil, it's not just a pipeline. It's a symbol of something greater. And modern politics is increasingly about slogans and symbolism. It's what actually happens every day, as opposed to the public debate, are materially different.
So looking ahead into 2021, where do you think the Canadian energy industry will be 1 year from now?
We're in a period of recovery. The oil price, if you recall, after COVID, the COVID lockdowns began last March. Oil actually went negative for a while. It had not only had a low value but no value, and so the price of oil has stabilized at a much higher level than many people thought. And so the gas prices are way up. Actually, natural gas prices are considerably higher than they have been for the past 5 years. So in terms of producing what we have, we're still in the business. Operating costs to produce what we have are 45 billion a year. That's staying steady. There was an announcement last week from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers that companies were going to increase their capital spending. That last year they took a year off, if you will, not knowing where the bottom was. A lot of maintenance spending and capital repair work and reserve replacement was deferred, not knowing where the basement was. So actually, all the numbers indicate already that 2021 is going to be a materially better year than it was in 2020. Unless something awful happens, Enbridge Line 3 is supposed to come on stream either late this year or early next year. That will take about 350,000 barrels a day. That's a lot of oil that won't have to go by rail. It'll be much more economical to ship it that way. Trans Mountain Soldier's on. LNG Canada is still building the LNG export terminal. That's supposed to come on sometime in 2023. So as I've said many, many times, when it comes to oil and gas, rumors of our demise are greatly exaggerated. Where do we win every day? We win at the gas pump and the burner tip. I mean, people still buy the product. The idea that we're a sunset industry, if you look at the world statistics, is grossly oversold. And so the fundamentals behind oil and gas are still pretty strong. We're a lean, mean fighting machine after another year of cutbacks. So the great news, if some cash comes in the door, it'll be more profitable than it has been. It's been a great cost great human toll in terms of jobs and companies. But last time I checked, we were the fifth largest oil and gas producing jurisdiction in the world, and that shall be the same case in a year, I'm sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your expertise, David. We really appreciate you having come on our show.
It's a little difficult to find a silver lining in this cloud, but we're still in the oil business, and we will be for many, many years to come. Thanks for asking.